Good evening, America. Welcome to the Monday edition of Just the News, No Noise. I'm your host, John Solomon, reporting to you as always from the nation's capital and the wiredtofishcoffee.com studios. Wired to Fish Coffee is the official coffee of Just the News. You know that now. And you can go right now and support them at wired2fishcoffee.com. If you use the promo code JustNews, you get 10% off. It's a great deal. All right, you're going to be hearing a lot about a potential government shutdown in the next few days because Congress is staring right down the barrel of one again very soon. And you can expect both sides, Republicans and Democrats, to blame the other if it does get to that. But if President Trump has his way, Republicans eventually will get on the same page and avert one. We're going to be talking all throughout the show about that today. It's a very important matter. Andy Harris, the chairman of the House Freedom Caucus, is going to join us in the second block. We'll catch a lot of budget update there. I want to turn to a couple quick things of accountability because as the President Trump's administration and his team gets in place, we're getting more and more of it. Today, Kash Patel's FBI announced that they have begun significant investigations into leakers, people who leak FBI-sensitive information to thwart cases or to create political consequences. That's a very big and important moment as we look out over that. The second thing that happened this morning, a story that broke on Just the News right around 9:30. Yours truly was riding on this one. Remember last year we told you that Congress, two separate House committees, sought access to the suspicious activity reports around Act Blue. That's the massive Democrat online fundraising group that raised at least $2 billion over the last 2 decades for Democratic causes. They didn't get them, according to a letter that we obtained today. They got a few of them at the very end of the Biden administration. Today, the two committees, led by James Comer and Brian Stile, asked President Trump's new Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, to turn that money over, or turn those records over so they can look and see where the money came from, specifically whether foreign money has been seeping into elections to the benefit of Democrats or liberal causes. We have more of that over at justthenews.com. Go check that out. We got a lot going on there. All right, I'm going to turn to my amazing co-host, Amanda Head. She has always a great bunch of headlines she's watching. What are you looking at today?
Indeed,
Happy
I do.
Monday.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I'm going to start with some international news. Our neighbors to the north, well, they have a new prime minister. Former Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau stepped down, and his Labour Party just held their elections to decide on the new leader, with former central banker Mark Carney winning the race to replace him by a wide margin with a whopping 86% of the vote, defeating former finance minister under Justin Trudeau, Chrystia Freeland. Carney is expected to be sworn in the coming days. In the Canadian system, for those of you, it's parliamentary, so it works a little differently from our elections. Liberal Party members were the ones who voted, not the whole population. So in total, about 152,000 people voted. He takes over during a trade war with the United States, and so far, he's at least acting tough. Here's what he had to say about it after his victory.
The Canadian government has rightly retaliated and is rightly retaliating with our own tariffs that will have maximum impact in the United States and minimum impact here in Canada. And my government will keep our tariffs on until the Americans show us respect.
So that was what he had to say about the respect owed. And John, I don't know about you, but the tariff war, even though it's heating up, it seems like south of the Canadian border here in the United States, I don't know if the tariffs are really being felt, but I'm pretty sure they're being felt in Canada.
The one place they're being felt are clearly in the stock market. The stock market down a lot today. But you're right. I think, listen, whenever you import more than you export, and Canada is much more reliant on goods from the United States, they're punishing themselves for the supply of goods they're going to need from the United States to survive. We have plentiful energy. That's basically what we import for them. Lumber we import for them, but pretty significant change in will be on the negative side for Canadians before Americans feel that. I think that's a real first part. Kash Patel's FBI also. We're just starting to see whether it was Kristi Noem at Homeland finding the two leakers of those ICE raids and referring them for criminal prosecution. Now the FBI. The FBI has been leaking like a sieve all throughout the Russia collusion case. The idea that it can be stopped and maybe they get back to the business of just solving crimes and then announcing them when there's an indictment, that would be, I think, a welcome addition for a lot of people in America.
Yeah, and in that intelligence community, also some news that DNI Tulsi Gabbard revoked security clearances from folks like former Secretary of State Antony Blinken and former DNI Jake Sullivan. Wonderful. All right, so we have our guest.
On that note, just real quickly, I got some new documents today from the National Archives that we'll be talking about later in the week. And Jake Sullivan shows up. Anthony Blinken shows up in
I
these
bet.
documents to Joe Biden. Stay tuned. Hopefully we'll have something we can break on the show
Okay,
one of the
show
next
up a
couple of
few
days.
times.
We're got about 10,000 pages of documents we're going through, but
Fantastic.
we're going to have some fun with that. All right, we're very lucky to kick off the show today with one of our favorite guests, Wyoming Congresswoman Harriet Hageman. Congresswoman, welcome to the show.
It's so good to be with you.
We love having you on. I want to start with something that you've been working on, and that's introducing legislation to promptly end political persecutions, and I think it's called Promptly Ending Political Persecutions and Executive Retaliation Act. I love the name of that. Talk a little bit about the motivation for this and what it will solve in the long last 10 years of misery we've had in this country, in this town particularly.
So it's Russell Fry, my colleague Russell Fry, that has introduced this, but the purpose of it is to make sure that we do not see the lawfare like what we've experienced over the last 4 years, and actually even before that, when the Obama administration attempted to go after Donald Trump for a variety of reasons. But the idea is that to the extent that a state court attempts to assert jurisdiction over a current or former federal official, that person can remove the case to federal court. So all of the persecutions that you saw with Fani Willis in Georgia and the New York persecutions, if this bill had been in place at that time, then Donald Trump could have been removed to federal court, and you would not have seen, number one, the lawfare, the selective prosecution, but you also would have had a more fair playing field for the accused in these cases. I don't think that the prosecutors would have brought the cases in the first place if they knew they were going to end up in federal court.
Yeah. Good point.
Absolutely. What do you make of these judges out there? There was another one in the last few days who overturned something that President Trump did and said the president is not king. If the president is not king, neither are the courts if they're trying to overturn what he did.
It's been an interesting dynamic, but I think we expected it. And more importantly, I believe the Trump administration expected that this was going to be the battle that they would have to play, that would play out. We saw it in the first administration, and I think he was a bit taken aback by how aggressive the courts were in trying to block him rather than implement the actual law. And so he's got a team in place now that they know what to do. I did see this week, and it's something that I've been talking about for quite a while. And in fact, I think I said it on your show the last time I was on here, is according to Rule 65 of the Rules of Civil Procedure, if you are seeking to block an official federal action, if you're seeking an injunction, you must post a bond in the amount of whatever damages could potentially be caused. So for example, we know about the tens of millions and hundreds of billions of dollars that have been spent on illegal aliens over the last 4 years. Let's say that you were able to get an injunction against a particular order that then allowed illegal aliens to come into the country, and we had to house them and feed them and all of those things. Whatever that cost, you could eventually force that party to pay if and when the federal government prevails. And I believe that the Trump administration will eventually prevail in these cases because under Article 2, he has the authority to control and dictate what the executive branch is going to do. So I think he will eventually prevail. And the other thing it would do is just really, it would put a financial burden on these NGOs, these state governments that are just going all out in lawfare in terms of trying to block his agenda, not because it's the right or legal thing to do, but because it's the political thing to do.
Yeah. Congressman, I want to talk a little bit about this week's very important business in Congress, getting a temporary CR done so you can get to a larger budget cuts at later in the year. What's the sentiment among Republicans? Do you think you get this done?
I think we do. I think that we're behind it. We recognize the importance of the situation we find ourselves in. I like this CR for a variety of things that it is doing, including the fact that while it is cutting spending, it is also plussing up some of our national defense spending, most specifically in giving our enlisted men and women a substantial raise, which they absolutely deserve it. And I have been in support of that with NDAAs and those sorts of things. So this is giving us the vehicle to give our military the raise that they deserve. So I think that that's a good point about this. The other thing that it does is it doesn't increase spending. And I've been a budget hawk that we need to be cutting spending. That's why I like DOGE as much as I do. I like what Elon Musk is exposing. We need to cut spending, and this CR is the first step in getting us lined out to be able to do our budget and then move on to reconciliation.
Do you anticipate that this will be a party line vote, or do you think some Democrats might cross over or maybe even Republicans go against?
I believe that there will be Democrats that cross over. I think that we have the majority, if not all, of the Republicans. I haven't talked to every one of them, but I do think that there's a pretty strong sentiment, including among the conservatives, where I definitely line up. I think we've got some good support there. As far as the Democrats, I think they would be crazy to leave this on the table, but it would just further solidify the fact that this is a political warfare for them. This is not about what's in the best interest of our country if they vote against it.
Yeah, it'd be hard to explain a vote against giving our men and women in uniform a pay raise. That's going to be a tough one to have to take home to their constituents for sure. Congressman, I want to ask a little bit about what's going on in the executive branch as Congress is working parallel. Today, the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, said, hey, 83% of USAID grants I'm able to get rid of. We're going to be good on that. Elon Musk is finding all sorts of waste, fraud, and abuse or savings. Is Congress, when in the next round, they're going to be able to incorporate all of these things that the executive branch found into law to further reduce the budget, correct?
Yes, I'm very excited about the work that they've been doing. Keep in mind, a year ago, I voted in favor of abolishing USAID because I've known for quite some time how toxic it is. And the point that I've made about this agency is it's obviously not one of our most expensive agencies. I think it's $50 to $60 billion, which is an astronomical amount of money. But it was spreading such an incredible toxicity around the world. And I don't care if you're from Colombia or Guatemala or the Middle East or India or England, Europe. We believe in family. We believe in community. We believe in traditional values. We believe in Judeo-Christian values. The vast majority of us do. And USAID was being used by a select few people to spread a level of toxicity, ideas, and ideology that was incredibly destructive to our relationship with people around the world. And I think people need to understand that it wasn't just what we were funding, mostly without our knowledge. And in fact, that's a point that I made in a speech I gave a couple of weeks ago, is that even the folks who worked at USAID knew how bad it was, what the policies were that they were pursuing, that they were actually attempting to hide any kind of congressional oversight whatsoever. Well, if they were proud of their work, they would have been willing to give Senator Joni Ernst everything that she had been asking for the last several years, as an example. They knew that once this was exposed, the gig was up, and that's why they've been trying to hide this information from Congress. But we now know, now it's time to abolish that agency. We move on to the next agency, expose its waste, fraud, and abuse. And in the end, the American taxpayer and the American citizen and our American culture is really what's going to benefit.
Yeah.
And this wokeness has seeped into practically every sector of American society, including with parental rights, something that I think up until maybe 5 years ago, people didn't think needed to be protected, but you've introduced legislation to do just that. Tell us about it.
So one of the things that happens is schools will get permission from parents at the beginning of the year saying that their students can go on field trips, that they can take surveys, that they can engage, that they can participate in certain classes. And then the parents think, okay, well, you know, they're not going to do anything bad at that school. I trust my school. They're going to make sure that they're acting in the best interest of my children. And then you find out that they're giving these kids surveys that are so completely and totally out of line with your moral authority, with what you believe in. I remember reading a survey in Wyoming many years ago that had actually been funded and produced by the University of Wyoming. It was directed at middle school students, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students. It asked how many sexual partners they had had in their lifetime. And I'm thinking, why are you asking 12-year-old kids about this? And why are you making it seem that it would be normal that it's more than zero? It was such a bizarre thing. So what this act does is it forces the school that whenever they're going to engage in these kinds of surveys, or they're going to have these kids attend classes that may be contrary to their parents' beliefs, they again have to get that permission to make sure that the parents are always engaged with what their children are seeing and learning at school.
So important. Congresswoman, just real quickly, as we were sitting talking here, earlier today, President Trump and his administration arrested and put into ICE detention a Palestinian who was involved in the Columbia University protests. A few moments ago, one of those federal judges we were talking about blocked the deportation of that activist. I'd like to just get your early reaction to that.
So again, they know which judges to go to. They're activist judges that are not applying the law, but they are applying their social justice view of the law. Ultimately, I believe that he will be deported. And here's the thing: when people come here as guests, their obligation is to abide by our laws and mores. Now, I am a very strong advocate for the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. I am not talking about that. But when you are engaging in terrorist activities or supporting terrorists, if you're supporting Hamas, there is no reason why we need to keep you here as a guest. And I think it's entirely appropriate to let these people know we're no longer going to tolerate this kind of behavior.
Yeah, and President Trump talked about this before the American people elected, so they knew they were electing the president to do exactly this. Congresswoman, as it always is, such a great opportunity to talk. Thank you for your common sense and wisdom today. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, great to have you on. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, we're going to talk more about that continuing resolution to fund the government from a surprising ally of it, the chairman of the House Freedom Caucus, Andy Harris, will be here next, right after these messages. Hey, folks, did you know scammers can literally steal your home right out from under you? The FBI calls it house stealing, and it's a growing real estate scam targeting American homeowners. Here's how it works. Criminals forge your signature on one document, use a fake notary stamp, pay a small fee, and file it with your local recorder's office. And just like that, your home title has been transferred out of your name. Then they can take out loans using your equity as collateral or even sell the property behind your back, and you won't even know it's happening until you start getting collections or foreclosure notices months later. So let me ask you, when was the last time you checked your home title lock? If you're like me, the answer is never. And that's exactly what scammers are counting on. That's why I trust Home Title Lock. Their $1 million triple lock protection helps keep your homes and equity safe. Here's what you get: immediate 24/7 monitoring of your property, urgent alerts if there are any changes, and if fraud should ever happen, their U.S.-based restoration team will spend up to $1 million to fix the fraud and restore your title at no additional cost to you. And here's the best part: I've teamed up with Home Title Lock to give you a free title history report so you can find out if you're already a victim and access to your personal title expert. A $250 value just for signing up. So do this. Go to HometitleLock.com and use my promo code JTN250. That's HometitleLock.com, promo code JTN250 to get the protection and peace of mind you deserve.
Welcome back, everybody. Hey, here we are again. Congress is tearing down another government shutdown this week, and with another continuing resolution on the table, can Republicans come together to pass it? Moreover, is it a good idea? Well, this current CR is getting some support from an unlikely place, the House Freedom Caucus. And joining us now to talk about why is Maryland Congressman and House Freedom Caucus Chairman Andy Harris. Congressman, thank you so much for being here.
Good to be with you.
The House Freedom Caucus traditionally and historically approaches CRs with an extreme amount of caution, but it sounds like you guys are on board for this one. What changed?
That's right. Well, I'll tell you, the traditional CR usually leads up to a big omnibus bill. And obviously, since this is a CR until the end of the fiscal year, there's going to be no omnibus bill this year for the first time in years. The other thing a CR normally does is it actually increases spending a little bit. This one actually decreases spending by about $7 billion. That's what the CBO will probably score this as. So this is a very different CR. It restricts funding. It actually helps the president fund his border enforcement. It gives a raise to our enlisted men and women in the military. It increases the food allotment in the Women's, Infants, and Children program. Again, it increases spending at the VA. This is a good CR. It's fiscally responsible, and the president needs it in order to continue the work of Doge and Elon Musk.
Yeah, that's a very important part. There's a lot of progress being made, and you want to codify that progress before the next budget bill. What is the outlook among the membership, among the Republican caucus? Is there enough votes to get this over the line before Friday?
I think there is. I do believe that we're going to see exactly what we saw 2 weeks ago when people said that you couldn't pass a debt ceiling increase with only Republican votes, and we said no, you actually can if it's combined with good fiscal policy. This is the same way. People say you can't pass a CR with only Republican votes, but I say yes, you can, as long as it's combined with good fiscal policy, and this is good fiscal policy.
That's great. The $7 billion in cuts that you mentioned, where does that come from?
Well, it comes from a variety of places. We actually clean out the Commerce Department slush fund that Joe Biden wishes he could have spent all that money, but he didn't. So we emptied that out. We also eliminated earmarks in this CR, and we took the monies that would normally be spent on earmarks and did things like spend it on more money for the VA and more money for our enlisted men and women.
Yeah, that's a winner. I think that's going to go over well with the American public. You have done a great job over the last several days knocking down some of the fear-mongering. People said they're zeroing out the toxic exposure fund at the VA. That's not true. They're hurting NIH, just the opposite. Can you knock down some of your favorite demagoguery that's been out there by the Democrats and their media allies?
Well, again, they say we're cutting food programs, we're actually increasing them. They say we're cutting the VA benefits, we're actually increasing the VA. The bottom line, NIH is not part of this. We continue the funding for the NIH. The administration, as you know, does want to cut the amount of overhead that are charged on these research projects, just so we can actually do more real research projects instead of paying for bloated overhead at universities that have, $40–50 billion endowments, who will have their hand out to the federal government for indirect administrative costs on grants. Again, we'll discuss all these things as we take an approach to providing an efficient federal government. That's what the president promised. That's what Elon Musk is working at. That's what the Republican conference in the House and the Republicans in the Senate, that's what we're working toward.
Great.
Well, and this will allow Elon Musk and his debt diggers to continue their work. I think their current ticker is at $102 billion. I know some of that's going to require congressional approval to make sure that it is out for good. Are you getting the indication that Congress is on board once that process approaches?
Yeah, so they will find savings both on the mandatory side with fraud, waste, and abuse, and they'll also find it on the discretionary side. On the discretionary side, we're going to deal with it in the FY26 appropriations bills, which are going to start bringing them through the House and within a couple of months. And by then, Elon will have fleshed out the exact savings to let us pinpoint where we can decrease the appropriations. On the mandatory side, we should be able to deal with that in reconciliation. Again, in 2 or 3 months, we should be piecing together and passing that reconciliation bill, which of course includes an extension of the tax cuts with the Trump tax cuts, but it's also going to deal with some of the mandatory program savings for fraud, waste, and abuse that Elon comes up with.
Yeah, huge, really huge opportunities here. So I want to talk about something that Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced today. Now that he's in charge of USAID, he said that 83% of those programs have been canceled. They're not important to his foreign policy approach, and that's a huge savings. It's not codified in this CR, and of course the next one will have to still be crafted, but there's savings going on every day just in front of our eyes, right?
That's absolutely right. So the president is withholding some funding. At some point, there may be an impoundment issue showdown because the president will probably impound some of the monies. And some of them he can actually send to Congress in what we call a rescissions bill, which actually asks Congress to confirm spending a decreased amount of money. So he can do it through Congress with a rescission bill. But I believe he has the power to do it through impoundment. I believe that when Congress passes an appropriation bill, it sets a ceiling. It doesn't set a concrete floor.
That's a great point.
Oh boy, I hear talk of rescission bills and impounding, and I can just imagine what the Democrat storyline and messaging line is going to be. How do you combat that?
Well, the vast majority of Americans think the federal government is basically inefficient. That 98, 95% of Americans don't work or are related to the federal government. They think that the federal government has to be right-sized. And I think that's the view that the president takes and Elon takes. Look, President Clinton laid off 230,000 federal employees. He was not a Republican. President Clinton understood that every once in a while, and now it's been 30 years since then, you actually have to go through any business or any government, and you have to right-size it. And that's what we're doing. And when we have a $2 trillion deficit that's driving up interest rates, driving up inflation, the average American will agree with us.
Yeah, that's such an enormous opportunity. Sir, you, among all your many accomplishments, a veteran, a doctor, member of Congress, chairman of the House Freedom Committee, I want to ask a little bit about medicine and a renewed look at how NIH may go about public health. It seems like there's an opportunity to rewire a lot of our public health systems, even as bird flu and measles and some other things are out there. How important is it to change the mentality that we kind of ran on during the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, that's a great question because, the National Institutes of Health is actually the National Institutes of Disease. What they do is they study disease. They don't spend enough time studying how to actually prevent disease. And that's very important. So I know that Mr. Kennedy, the Secretary Kennedy now over at HHS, I just had a conversation with the Secretary over at USDA. They want to talk about helping America avoid disease, and part of it is through nutrition. I think the NIH has to be part of that. It has to do the good research that's needed to be done to make sure that we're not doing anything that harms Americans. And I'm afraid when we subsidize, because we do, when we subsidize unhealthy foods, for instance, we're actually doing more harm than good.
Congressman, there are a number of these health agencies' functions that can be redundant. In the interest of consolidating and folding, organizations like NSAID into the State Department, are there functions of these agencies that can be consolidated such that that funding, instead of going to the redundancy of those programs, can actually go to the research and the preventative measures that Americans need?
That's absolutely right. So, for instance, we have a lot of redundant research programs. We have research programs in the Department of Defense that are identical practically to research that is done at the NIH. We have the CDC getting involved in some things that are just not have nothing to do with communicable disease or infectious disease. They have to return to their roots. So what you have is you had mission creep across a broad range of health-related agencies, and that redundancy becomes pretty expensive, and again, it becomes unnecessary. So again, I hope the president, his administration, his secretaries, and Elon keep that in mind as they look at how we can make government run more efficiently.
So real quick, we only have a few seconds up. I want to ask you about this. As the government begins to get cut, it puts pressure downward on interest rates, which long-term solves debt service in the government. Is the first step of cutting government a potential to create more savings because interest rates will go down eventually?
Well, it's actually a helpful spiral. Obviously, as interest rates go down, it makes our ability to decrease the deficit in the long range actually easier. And you pointed it well out. Right now, the government is competing with private industry for capital dollars. The person who lends money, they can lend it to the government, they can lend it to a private individual. Now they're lending it to the government. There's competition, it increases interest rates. We have a real interest on the government side in seeing interest rates come down so that our interest on the federal debt, which is now over $1 trillion a year, comes down.
For once, a vicious cycle that's good. I love it. Maryland Congressman and House Freedom Caucus Chairman Andy Harris, thank you so much for being here, sir.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Up next, we're going to talk to the CEO of a company that is revolutionizing American energy. We'll be with that next.
Welcome back, America. As we've been reporting at Just the News here on this show, nowhere is there more innovation going on than in the energy industry. I know a lot of people talk about AI, that helps, and it'll be used in the energy industry. But remarkable things going on, as we discussed in the show last week with the nuclear modular reactors that are beginning to crop up all around the world. Another place that's going on, the grid, a company named VoltaGrid, which we introduced you to a couple of months ago, making extraordinary and explosive gains, finding a way to get new grids up in record time. Their CEO, Nathan Ough, is returning to join us today to give us a quick update. Nathan, good to have you back on.
Perfect. Thanks, John and Amanda. It's fantastic. And thanks for having me.
It is great to have you. Last week, or I guess last month, a huge announcement. You're partnering with one of the largest data center makers in the world for a 1 gigawatt project. Tell us a little bit about this and how a modular, scalable grid makes what they're doing more realistic, more quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so about 2 weeks ago, we announced a kind of a transformational transaction in the U.S. with Vantage Data Centers, which will see us build out a minimum of about 1,000 megawatts or 1 gigawatt worth of power generation in a very near term in the world of power plant and data center build timelines. And you'll see that capital investment happen right across the U.S. In a few different locations. And I think you'll actually see the investment on our behalf actually grow in size and scope. But the biggest takeaway, I think, for the market and really for everybody and all your viewers to realize is this is an investment that we're making with American equipment, American jobs, and ultimately at what I call the new era of speed, right? Conventional power plant world would take anywhere from 3 to really 5 years to build that scale and size, and we're doing that capital investment in about 12 to 15 to 16 months. And so just a really transformational transaction for us, a ton of job creation. You'll see VoltaGrid. I think we just crossed over 1,000 employees in the U.S., up almost double year over year. And you'll see us continue to hire. Right now, I feel like I hire an employee a day almost across the business. So it's really exciting, and I think the government set us up to be, really invest in the country.
Yeah.
Hey, that's more numbers for the jobs report. So I have a feeling this administration is going to be cheering about that.
We're doing our part.
Yeah, absolutely. Is this going to feed, because John and I have conversations on air all the time about the amount of energy required, and that's going to increase exponentially for artificial intelligence. But it sounds like with your company, the cavalry is coming.
That's right. Yeah. So most of the stuff we're doing is actually doing power plants dedicated purely to the AI compute center, to the data center, and actually removing that load off of the grid itself. And so call it a behind the meter isolated or an island type approach. The value that brings is you kind of get the best of both worlds. You get the job creation, you get the capital investment, you get the tax base increase. But what you avoid is any impact to the localized grid that may impact the larger community in general. And so talk about just a real trifecta win-win where you're supporting capital investment, you're supporting job creation, you're supporting the U.S. winning the AI race. Because I promise you, if you don't have electrons, you don't win the race, period. Yeah. And so really the pillars of all three are kind of colliding, and I think we're truly the first to trailblaze it. But as we kind of continue to progress it, you'll see the industry taking a bigger and bigger approach to gas generation.
As people look at what you're doing, you're really disrupting a half century or more of the way utility grid work did. Usually they're major public projects. They often take 5, 10, 15 years. You're able to do this in a matter of months and then hop around the country to where the most urgent need is, rather than just focus on one city or one state for 10 or 12 years. What does that mean for the way our economy is going to develop in an AI era, in the next generation of manufacturing in America as well? Because a lot of manufacturing likely to come back to the United States with President Trump's trade policies.
Absolutely, and I think you take not only the onshoring of manufacturing and the impact that power requirement puts on the grid, which companies like ours will go and solve, but I also want to stress that VoltaGrid has 2 very large manufacturing sites in the U.S., and so not only are we enabling manufacturing to come onshore back to the U.S., we're doing exactly what we're preaching, which is manufacturing in the U.S. as well. And so, you'll see VoltaGrid this year spend, north of $700 million of capital injection through our U.S. supply chain network. And so not only are we supporting the U.S. from a power deployment perspective, we're also putting those dollars back into the country as well. So it's kind of a win-win and a great story that we can drive across the spectrum. I think second to that, ultimately, the U.S. today doesn't produce enough electricity to achieve the goals of the AI race or winning that race against China. And so ultimately, if we are going to win it, and we want to win it, I promise you that, we as a supply chain, an American supply chain, need to be aligned and align those stars to go and enable the industry to get that power generation and get it at a speed at which is meaningful to supply the data center market, because it's truly what I view as the next industrial revolution that's happening before our eyes today. And power is the number one input to it.
Yeah, you said win-win, but there's also a third win there to make it a win-win-win. You guys cut emissions with this power generation, so that's got to make the green lobby happy. How do you do it?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think a lot of people talk about it has to be energy transition. You must transition from fossil fuel to natural, or from fossil fuels or natural gas to wind and solar. But I think we've lost the perspective that when America shifted from coal to gas and over the last, call it 10 to 15 years, we single-handedly had the largest impact or reduction of our emissions profile. And I think we've lost perspective that as we shift more and more power load to clean burning natural gas in the US, and we focus on air scrubbers and even cleaning up the emissions that come off our sites, we'll have a bigger impact to the overall emissions profile. So it is truly a win-win. If it wasn't, we wouldn't have grown so fast. And you'll see us as a company, just to give you an exciting stat, what we have achieved at VoltaGrid in the last 3 years of this company, we will replicate that again in the next 12 months. That's how fast things are going.
That is mind-boggling. It really is. And you're also, just real quick, we got about 30 seconds left. You're also solving some problems in emergency management, disaster relief, right? You can put up a grid quickly in a place that's hard hit, right?
Absolutely. We had our first inbound from overseas as well. So things seem to be speeding up in the emergency power response business, but we're really excited about the U.S. AI industry and the data center markets in the U.S. Yeah. It is truly a one in a lifetime opportunity.
This is game-changing and economy-changing technology, what you're doing, Nathan. Just remarkable. Thanks. I know how busy you are. Thanks for making time for us on the show today. Great update. Thanks so much.
You're awesome. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, what a great conversation. What a great technology and what a great innovator Nathan is. All right, we're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, more on all the waste, fraud, and abuse the government's uncovering. Yes, it's happening every day. We're going to speak with the Vice President of the Government Accountability Institute, Harriet Hageman, next.
Welcome back to Just the News, No Noise. Ever since President Trump got back into office and DOJ started finding tons of waste, fraud, and abuse, the deep state has been fighting back against it. They say that while there is some fraud, it's simply not that much. And we even have judges stopping the executive branch from cutting funding. So what can actually be done about America's out-of-control spending? Joining us now to discuss that is the Vice President of the Government Accountability Institute, Eric Eggers. Eric, thanks so much for being here.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Good to be with you both.
The optics are not great for Democrats because it appears that they oppose rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse. Maybe that's not true, it's the optic, but maybe they are just opposed to the means by which it's happening. Can you parse that out for us?
Yeah, I think maybe both things are true. I think on the one hand, it would be a poor reflection on them and the job they've done over the last 4+ years if in fact they've presided over a system that was as rife and rampant with waste, fraud, and abuse as it appears to be. Remember, this is the Democrats from Joe Biden to the people in charge now that helped dole out unprecedented sums of money in the name of COVID relief. And we now know that billions of dollars worth of that money went to places it shouldn't have gone, not just for COVID, but for other sort of green energy, climate fantasies. So I think on the one hand, it's a bad look for Democrats to admit that what they've been presiding over is so wasteful of taxpayer dollars. I think on the other hand, their business model is being fundamentally upended. If their job has been to pass out taxpayer-funded goodies to their buddies, and that spigot has been shut off, then it's almost like that scene in Office Space. If Democrats can't give away money anymore to their benefactors, then it's like, what would you say you do here?
Yeah, the operation
and the answer, unfortunately, is like not a lot. So I think that's kind of where we're at.
Yeah, without the power of the purse, there's no power at all in Washington. That's exactly right. Eric, I want to talk a little bit about something that Congressman Andy Harris mentioned on the show earlier today. He's the chairman of the House Freedom Caucus, on board with getting a temporary CR to get to this bigger savings. He said he thinks that the combination of Congress enacting rescissions, meaning pulling back money that had previously been approved, and President Trump simply impounding money, refusing to spend it even if it was authorized, that there could be larger savings than most Americans are counting on. Those are two terms we seldom hear in Washington, rescission and impoundment. Tell us, do you think there's maybe a historic cut on the horizon for us?
You know, that's an excellent idea, and I commend the congressman for suggesting it. I did some research on this because it's a term that we're now using. So President Reagan used, I think, 101 rescissions, or just over 100 in his 8 years in office. George W. Bush used 0. And, you know, I think it just speaks to the shift that we've seen. Some people wanted to take cutting the budget seriously and cutting the deficit and debt seriously, and others clearly have not. And I think it's telling that George W. Bush hasn't, from then on, basically, we started to see Washington, D.C. become incredibly wealthy and incredibly powerful. The 4 wealthiest zip codes in this country are not around Silicon Valley, which actually produces something. They're around Washington, D.C., which only collects our money. And so I do think the fact that they're even suggesting using things like this is a very promising sign for the United States taxpayer. And, I mean, consider this. You're now seeing the media narrative shift from, well, how much waste, fraud, and abuse could there be, to now that $105 billion with a B has been identified. The narrative is not, oh my gosh, I can't believe there's that much waste, fraud, and abuse. It's, well, that's not enough to really get the U.S. debt and deficit under control. I mean, that's how successful this DOGE effort has been. So we're now in however many figures that is. I think it's 9. And so, and the cuts will only continue. And there's still a lot more to look at. They haven't even got to the Pentagon yet, John. So, I mean, imagine how much more money they can find.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah,
I hear the chainsaws going already.
Yeah. I want to ask you, Stacey Abrams never called off her gubernatorial race, but she might have to call off her NGA that she started that apparently was only able to raise about $100, but it got a really nice injection of $2 billion. What do you anticipate the fate of this organization is going to be? And where did that money go? What was she doing?
Well, it was Biden administration executives themselves that said they were tossing gold bars off the edge of the Titanic as this thing was sinking. Here's what's crazy, is this is part of a $20 billion effort from these things that were sort of invented under the EPA, these new loan programs, which, by the way, the Inspector General for the EPA testified to Congress and said, we cannot monitor this money. You have not given us a mechanism by which to make sure the money goes to where it's supposed to go. So maybe we shouldn't be surprised that it didn't. In fact, it went to these new nonprofits. As you noted, Stacey Abrams' nonprofit collected $100 in 2023, and now she's connected to this thing called Power Forward Communities, which is getting something like $4 billion or $2 billion. There was 2 other organizations that collected, I think, between $7 and $5 billion under the same program. And here's the crazy thing about that. Stacey Abrams, she's done a lot of things. She's been an election denier. She's been a candidate for every office in Georgia that you can imagine. You know what she's not? Is a scientist. And so you have all this green energy money that's going to people that are affiliated with people like Stacey Abrams. The other group is affiliated with somebody who came from Obama's Fannie Mae. And actually, and no kidding, another group is led by somebody who used to be in charge of the loan program at the Department of Energy under the Obama administration after the Solyndra scandal. But none of these people are in charge of making sure that the technology that we're allegedly funding actually exists or can do what we're paying it to do. In fact, it's quite likely that it's not. So it's clearly a money laundering operation to funnel, and I think it's even been admitted this week, it was funneling get out the vote operations in these key states. They're trying to go after the black and brown communities, just like the Obama executive order, or excuse me, the Biden executive order to weaponize the federal government as part of the get out the vote effort ahead of the 2024 election. It's a scandal, and our money paid for it.
Yeah, and Eric, we should point out GAI did all the great work that actually identified the Stacey Abrams grant, and that really suspicious set of circumstances. Of course, that was part of the reason it got canceled. Great work, you and everybody else at the Government Accountability Institute, doing some of the great investigative journalism we need in this country. Such an honor to have you on the show tonight. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, it's my pleasure, and it's because of programs and websites like yours that we're able to continue to point out the hard truths that the American people need to hear. So thank you very much.
You're giving us those hard truths, and they're well sourced and well factually based. That's what we love about the GAI. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, a closer look at the Department DOGE has found the most wasted so far. Guess what it is? The Department of Education. We'll have that next.
Welcome back. It's the final segment of the evening, so let's get into DOGE and waste, fraud, and abuse. The Trump administration is shaking up a lot of the federal government, and that most certainly includes the Department of Education. New Education Secretary Linda McMahon is tasked with reining it in, so how is she going to be able to do that? Joining us now to answer that and much more is Campus Reform's Editor-in-Chief, Dr. Zachary Marschall. Dr. Marschall, thanks so much for being here.
Great to be back.
All right, President Trump, we all anticipate he is going to direct Secretary McMahon to start dismantling the department. What does that look like?
It looks like Secretary McMahon winding down operations as much as possible until President Trump is able to get the department abolished. We've already seen the administration offer Department of Education employees $25,000 payout packages to just leave the department. And we're also seeing DOGE cut a lot of money, or pressuring the Department of Education to cut money that funds universities, contracts, and research. So I think we're going to see straining of funds, plus getting people to exit the building until they're able to abolish the department completely.
You and DOGE are both keeping close track of the agencies that are doing the most work to save American taxpayers money. I think the Department of Education has topped out at $1 billion already. Tell us, how was there that much beef in an education department that was supposed to send money back to help kids in schools?
Yeah, and what we found out is that about 70% of the nearly $900 million that DOGE has cut from the Department of Education is all related to DEI. And DEI gets funded in a lot of different ways. These are grants, these are contracts. This is part of how people get hired, different initiatives on campuses. So it's very unsurprising that this was what was being cut, and there was such a high proportion of the waste that DOGE was able to find. And Campus Reform has been reporting for years that DEI informed student services, school amenities, those things they try to attract you with on campus tours. That's really the driver of rising tuition rates. So it's no surprise to me that they found so much pork in the DEI pot at the department.
Dr. Marschall, I looked at a Morning Consult Ed Choice survey from November, and it showed that under 30% of Americans have a positive view of our federal education system. What's even worse is that 15% of teachers would recommend the teaching profession to a friend. With numbers like that, do you anticipate that as this ball really gets rolling down the ramp, that President Trump is going to have the wind in his sails?
I think so. I'm actually shocked the number was that high. If that over 20% prove, I'm shocked. I think parents are fed up. I think that, for those with older kids, I think they're fed up with having to pay $100,000 a year for colleges that don't protect Jewish students or that don't teach their kids real life lessons. And you don't want to put kids in public schools that fail them forward. So I think we're seeing a lot of enthusiasm for homeschooling. We're seeing a ton of enthusiasm for school choice. And I think the parents supporting those movements are going to keep Trump's popularity up.
Dr. Marschall, among the other things your great group does, Campus Reform focuses on extremism, anti-Semitism on campuses. Earlier today, the president took action to begin the deportation process for a Palestinian here lawfully in the United States, but who's been tied to protests at Columbia University, anti-Israel, some say anti-Semitic. And then a few hours later, a judge kept the president from doing something that seems to be in his purview under the Constitution. The role that judges are playing in tripping up both DOGE and the president on that Palestinian deportation.
Yeah, I think this is going to be the first of many, and I've always said that this process is going to be slow and gradual. It is not going to be linear, so we should expect some setbacks and some pauses, but I think it's full steam ahead. Just in the last 2 hours, the administration announced that they're doing another 60 investigations into schools that fail to protect Jewish students. So I think this is not only the first thing to happen at Columbia, but Columbia is going to be the first of many schools to have their federal funding cut. They just lost $400 million, and the first school to see their students rightly deported. This is where it started, and this is where the solution needs to start as well.
All right, I want to finish off with something cultural. The Kennedy Center, a hub of performing arts here in Washington, D.C., the pride of performing arts here. Some cuts and some shakeups. Tell us what you think about them.
Yeah, so President Trump got rid of all the Biden-appointed trustees last month at the Kennedy Center, which is our premier performing arts center in the entire country, because they really dropped the ball when it comes to putting on the best art for all Americans. Instead, they chose leftist ideology and were having drag queens put on concerts targeted towards children. He replaced them with a board that cares more about artistic excellence than the previous people did, and they named him chairman of the Kennedy Center. And I think this is an important step into restoring our national identity and the power and prestige we're able to project abroad to both our allies and our enemies. There's a role to play for the arts and culture in our society, but it needs to be based on merit and artistic excellence, not on someone's idea of what gender ideology should be.
Yeah. The whole idea of
imagine
arts,
that.
performing arts included, is to push the boundaries in all directions, but it seems like the Kennedy Center has been
Performance.
pushing it only in one direction for a
Yeah.
long time. Dr. Zachary Marschall, Campus Reform's editor-in-chief, always a pleasure having you here. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, that's it for us. Grant Stinchfeld is going to take you through the next hour. We will be back here tomorrow night at 6 p.m. Eastern, right here on Real America's Voice. Everybody, head over to justthenews.com for more great headlines throughout the night and tomorrow.